Thomas Saenz, thanks for joining us from your office in LA, right?
Absolutely.
Where they had snow for about 10 seconds and then it went away.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So you announced when you were in Seattle in the fall at the El Centro Gala celebration, its 50th, that MALDEF was going to open a Seattle office. Why is MALDEF moving up here?
Because of the growth of the Latino community in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, mainly. Because we work on a regional model where we like to have attorneys who are close to the action, as it were, to assess the regional conditions. So we are still eagerly looking forward to establishing that fifth regional office for us.
So that's going to be here in Seattle, that fifth office.
That's right.
And how big a staff do you expect to have up here?
Well, we'll start slow, but eventually I would expect to have 4 attorneys and associated support staff with them.
And is that reflective of the fact that the Latino population here, well, in our state, is the largest ethnic group, which I think we are nationally as well. It's consistently been growing, and I take it that the issues are the same throughout the country.
Well, they're certainly similar, but we do like to make sure that we're attending to whatever local and regional priorities there may be. But there is certainly too much replication by the bad guys, if you will, from one state to another, one region to another. Yeah. And yes, it is because of the growth of the Latino community, which the 2020 census tells us, despite the largest undercount for Latinos of any racial ethnic group in the country, that we are now exceed 10% of the population in a majority of the states, which is the first time that's happened. Project that within the next decade, it'll be closer to 2/3 of the states will have more than 10% of the population that is Latino. And obviously that's happening in the Northwest, including in Washington State. And that's why we want to be there.
Is that number that you just cited, is that the main reason why all these white nationalist right wingers are just losing their minds?
It's a big part of it. But I think it's another number from the census, which is that Latinos accounted for 51% of the nation's total population growth that probably scares them the most. That when you are 19% of the population, as Latinos are, but you're accounting for 51% of the growth of the entire country, and probably more than that, given the 5% undercount, I do think that's what sparks all of this ridiculous replacement theory talk and the like.
So why do you think, I mean, with that sort of demographic power, why are Latinos in government, in politics, in elected offices, why are they so underrepresented?
I think there's a couple of reasons, but you start with the fact that we are a younger community than others. So we have a higher proportion of the Latino population that's below the age of 18. So that changes, obviously, every month, every day. More and more Latinas age into being eligible to vote. But we also have a lower citizenship rate, certainly than white populations and Black populations, which also means there are folks who still have not had the chance to naturalize, become citizens, and vote. So we, because of those two demographic facts, punch below our total population when it comes to the vote. But then you add to that really decades and decades of discrimination both in the form of attempting to stop Latinos who are eligible to vote from registering and voting, but also discrimination in the form of election systems that make it unlikely, at least historically in too many parts of the country, unlikely that a candidate can be elected based on support from the Latino community. So this means things like at-large elections, redistricting that fails to take account of the growth of the Latino community, and other structures of government that make it hard for folks to justify voting when they time after time see their candidates lose because these structures are set up in that way.
Talk about that undercount during the Trump years. How did that happen?
Well, as you know, Enrique, there's always an undercount for certain communities right. Of color, poor communities, younger communities, obviously homeless communities and the like. So we would always expect an undercount, but we did have the largest undercount, much larger than a decade prior, And that I think is largely because of the Trump administration's attempt several times to try to deter participation, prevent participation by Latino households. As you know, the census counts us household by household. So if a household doesn't respond, then there's a high likelihood that you're either going to miss the entire household or some portion of the household, because the Bureau is going to use administrative records or talking to your neighbor, and they're unlikely to get a full picture, a full count of that household when they do that. But households probably avoided filling out the form because of all of the publicity around, number one, Donald Trump's aggressive anti-immigrant stance, threatening to send folks to pick people up left and right. But you add to that the attempt to add a citizenship question, unprecedented since more than 50 years prior. And that was clearly designed to deter participation by households with both citizens and non-citizens in them. You add to that his later efforts to count the undocumented solely so that he could subtract them from the count used to distribute seats in the House of Representatives. And then his directive that the Bureau provide a database of all non-citizens, not just the undocumented, but even those with lawful permanent residence. And he wanted that in order to count only citizens when it came to redrawing districts for legislature, Congress, and the like. So you have this whole narrative leading up to the census of aggressive anti-Latino stances by the administration, coupled with real attempts to deter participation through adding questions, changing structures, designed to intimidate people. And it resulted in what you would expect, which is a significant increase in the undercount from 10 years prior, and the highest undercount for any racial ethnic community in the country.
The thing that gets me is that all of that you just mentioned, and yet there seems to be an increase among Latinos in their support of Trump and Trump type philosophy. What's with that?
Well, first of all, I think a lot of that is overblown by the mainstream media. They have a tendency to focus on very small jurisdictions and act as though that's a harbinger of the nation. I think the vast majority of Latinos are not obviously supportive of Donald Trump. We're still talking 65-70% against, which is a landslide by any measure. But I do think, to the extent there was an uptick, and there probably was between 2016 and 2020, it is likely more of a reaction to feeling taken for granted by the Democratic Party. And that is a continuing problem. The Democratic Party seems to not take the steps it takes with respect to other communities to bolster and even increase Latino support. Now, that's a short-sighted strategy because of the growth of the Latino community, as you said. Whatever the story was about the election in 2016 and even 2020, the story in 2024 is going to be more and more about the growth of the Latino community. And when you write off that community by failing to make real efforts to make it clear how important they are, to make it clear how essential they are, you are going to see some drop off. As you said, it's never going to be anything but a landslide in support of Democrats, at least for the foreseeable future. But what matters is the turnout, right? So when you don't do enough to spark interest and turnout, that's when you pay the price.
Yeah. It's interesting because that sort of same dynamic happens in the Asian community, right? Because almost by nature, immigrants are more conservative in their values. Generally, they're forced to be entrepreneurial. They go, and so they see government intervention, that sort of thing, is not a great thing. And so I know that there's a large percentage of Asians that will vote Republican because of those values. And for some reason, it escapes them the sort of racist overtones that are there because they mainly look for their economic well-being. But
it's racist overtones, as you said. That's what really is hurting the Republican side, because on the natural, as you described, if they weren't pursuing that strategy, it would be a different picture. Now, I still
Yeah.
think the majority would vote Democratic in both communities, but it would be a much closer picture if it didn't seem to be not just Trump, but others who follow him in the Republican Party that are building a brand that is poisonous as far as immigrant communities go. When you are 100% aligned against immigrant communities, it's really hard for you to then take advantage of whatever natural political affinity there might be. So it's a great, great opportunity, by contrast, for Democrats that the Republicans are screwing up as badly as they are. But Democrats have been unable to really take as much advantage of that as they could because they take communities for granted.
You talked about demography is not destiny. Explain that when you spoke at the gala here in Seattle. Or you had, go ahead.
It means there's still a struggle for even a community like the Latino community, growing as fast as it is and in significant numbers in some of the most important and most populous states in the country. That by itself isn't going to suffice. You still have to spend the time and the effort to demand equity, or it's not going to be handed to any community. Indeed, as we talked about previously, the growth of the Latino community sparks a backlash. And that backlash can be a real barrier to the kind of equitable representation that growing communities should be entitled to in a democracy. And that's not just representation in government and elected positions, as we've talked about. It's representation in so many other areas. I think media, obviously critically important, both entertainment media and news media, where Latinos are woefully underrepresented, have the largest gap between population percentage and percentage in leadership positions. But that's also true on boards of directors in corporate America. That's also true when it comes to the bench. I'm particularly concerned about the Biden administration's really anemic record when it comes to appointments of Latinos and Latinas to federal judicial positions, where we are being left behind in the context of an administration that with respect to other groups is breaking records about diversity of representation in its judicial nominations. That is not true for the Latino community. Indeed, in some respects, things have gotten worse. The 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the federal court of appeals just below the Supreme Court, 10th Circuit covers states like Colorado and New Mexico. New Mexico, the highest Latino percentage of any state in the country. Yet at the beginning of the Biden administration, there was one Latino judge, active judge in the 10th Circuit. He took senior status, and the Biden administration appointed a non-Latino to succeed him. So now we have the 10th Circuit with no Latino or Latina judges at all hearing cases on appeal in a region that includes, as I mentioned, Colorado, New Mexico, also Utah, with its growing Latino population.
But how does that happen?
How does that happen? They don't prioritize the issue. They don't prioritize ensuring Latino representation, which is particularly damaging when you think about the federal judiciary. Everybody is looking to appoint both sides, both Republican administrations, Democratic administrations. They're looking for younger folks to sit in these life tenured positions, knowing that that means those folks will be sitting on the bench 25, 30, 35 years from now. That's when it's really damaging not to represent a growing community like Latinos, because it means these positions will be held 25, 30 years from now in a context when the Latino population will have exploded even more. I like to remind folks that when I look at the future of the country, look at our public school population, which today is more than 1/4 Latino nationwide from kindergarten through 12th grade.
1 in 4 is, I think, was the number that you noted when you spoke.
Greater than 1 in 4, because our numbers keep growing. So that's what America looks like 25, 30 years ago in the adult population. And we're appointing judges now, not from the Latina community, who are going to still be making decisions when that's what America looks like.
So even with the new demographic shift, we'll still have a bunch of old white guys ruling their lives.
Oh, white guys and really not reflecting the future. You want a judiciary that reflects the future, not just today, which is what the Biden administration is at best doing for the Latino community, but you want one that reflects the future, given how long these folks will serve.
Yeah. How is that disparity affecting major issues that really focus on the Latino community, particularly like DACA?
Well, it means that you have folks that don't really have an understanding from their own life or professional experience of what these issues entail. What's the real world impact, for example? Now, judges are supposed to apply the law, no question, but the law is always influenced, as you both know, by context. And when you have justices or judges who lack the context, the proper context, the actual reflection of reality, then you're going to get decisions that are unreal, that are unconnected to what's really going on the street. And that's never good. And that's a problem when you have folks who are in an ivory tower for too long, no matter what their race is. But it's compounded when you have folks who are coming from a particular slice of society and making decisions for everyone. When I projected what America would look like in 25 years, what that means in the court system is more and more of the cases that go to the U.S. Supreme Court are going to involve Latinos, Latino communities at their center. It doesn't matter the issue. The issue of reproductive choice, no accident that Dobbs and a lot of the cases dealing with choice issues previously come out of states with growing Latino populations. Texas is at the center of so much of this. And Texas is 40% Latino. When you talk about restricting reproductive choice, as they now do in Texas, you're talking about impacting millions of Latino women more than any other group. And that will be true no matter the issue 25 or 30 years from now. That's how big the Latino community will be.
Do you think the whole issue of DACA will ever progress? I mean, it just seems like there's never any progress. And these poor kids are just in limbo.
Yeah, the best that we can do, and we've strived through our representation of DACA holders in the litigation by Texas seeking to strike it down, is to protect the status quo, just to extend as long as you can the protection that these DACA holders have, not just from deportation, but the work authorization that comes with it. But it's important to remember that DACA was always just a short-term approach, given that the Obama administration had failed to obtain immigration reform while it had the power of supermajority in the Senate. So we were left with DACA as a stopgap measure, and it still is. We need the legislature, the Congress, and in particular these days, both the House and the Senate, because of the filibuster, really to come around to how important this cohort of young immigrants is to our economy, to our polity, to our society. There's just no denying that it's in the national interest to fix the problem, to fix the issue without this stopgap measure. That's for the betterment of the entire country. We need to ensure that we don't lose these young immigrants' contributions.
Where are we right now with DACA in the courts?
So the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals concluded that the district court was correct that DACA is unlawful. We think that's absolutely wrong. But it did send the case back to the district court at our request, representing those DACA holders, to look at the issue again in the specific context of the new Biden administration rules on DACA. And so that's what's going on right now. The district court has the case once more. It is looking specifically at the Biden administration rule, and it will, in some way or other, reach its decision and grant a judgment on the Biden administration rules. If it still concludes it's unlawful, it will go up to the Fifth Circuit again. And ultimately, by one means or another, case is likely to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. But right now, we're back in district court resolving the specific issues attendant to the Biden administration rule.
So it's like a ping pong game right now.
It is, but again, it's really about making sure you can extend the protections as long as possible. So right now, while all this is going on, current DACA holders can continue to renew their DACA every 2 years. And that's critically important. The shame is that as a nation, we're denying so many potential new applicants for DACA, new, eager, educated young immigrants. We're denying them any possibility of applying for DACA for the first time.
And that Fifth Circuit Court, again, the makeup, isn't it?
It's one of the most conservative courts in the country, and it is another circuit. Even though it only has 3 states in the region it covers, the most dominant of which is Texas, with its 40% Latino population. The Fifth Circuit has no Latino or Latina judges sitting on it at this point. Now, that's both because of the Trump administration's appointments, but also because the Biden administration, in the appointment or 2 that it has made, has not addressed that exclusion in the circuit.
So if the demography, as you pointed out, is changing, and there's a kind of a browning of America going on, but yet we also have a growing number of Latinos that are just, seeking professions and getting established in American life. And if we are growing so much, why can't we make any inroads when it comes to politics and government and having a voice at the table? Substantially.
I think we have made some inroads, no question. I don't want to be too much of a downer. I think we've made great progress. But there is a real backlash. That is in some ways to be expected when you get as large as the Latino community is, that there will be a backlash. We see it in its most crass form in the replacement theory, rhetoric, and ideology of Donald Trump and others. But we also see it in a slow reduction of the kinds of protections against discrimination we've seen in the past. Front and center is the Supreme Court's current consideration of cases from Harvard and the University of North Carolina related to race-conscious admissions. I can't be optimistic about the outcome, and there's going to be then a nationwide dilemma that I'm not sure we're prepared for when a decision comes down that says you may no longer engage in race-conscious admissions. Now, that's been true in California, where I am, and in Washington, where you both are, for quite some time through state initiatives. But it's important to note that those initiatives, both in California and Washington, applied only to public universities. Mm-hmm. We're now talking about a decision out of the Harvard case that would affect private universities across the country, so even in California and Washington state. But you add to that the rest of the country is going to be looking to our states for examples of how you successfully navigate this. And I'm not sure we're the gleaming examples that I wish we were about how to address this. And in particular, how to ensure that a decision doesn't get over-interpreted. In California, when Prop 209 passed, and similarly in Washington state, the first reactions were, oh, you can't even talk about race. You can't talk about racial disparity. You can't talk about any of those things if you're a policymaker. Now, that's absolutely not true under either of those initiatives. But you can expect the same kind of over-interpretation, attempted over-application of this Supreme Court decision. And I'm not sure that we're ready as a nation to push back as hard as we need to. Once this decision comes down, there will be even greater reason for policymakers to be discussing and certainly aware and monitoring racial disparities when it comes to admissions to universities and other measures of educational success.
Yeah. What does it mean to you when someone says, oh, they bring up the term woke?
Well, I think it's a term that has been really taken by the right wing and in an attempt to demonize it. It's like its predecessor, PC, right? That was more used by the right wing to try to diminish folks' adherence to respectful policy, respectful dialogue. Woke to me means that you are aware and have been awoken to the systemic racism that is so much part and parcel of too many of our engines of power in this country, starting not just with police forces, but I think we have to include the education system. You have to include the broader system of government. You have to include the corporate system. There's just a lot of baked in, sometimes quite well hidden, racial bias in so much decision making in this country. And woke means you're aware of that. Now, the term has been demonized, I think, so much by the right wing that it's not a term I use a lot.
Yeah.
Because it has become a bad word for too many who, if they understood what it was about, would not see it as a bad word.
It's been hijacked, and really just like liberal, using that term to make it like a dirty word. But and in fact, the thing that gets me is that in the Black community, that's where that term has its base. It was all about being aware what's a good thing that might be for the community that they can benefit from, and yet it's been taken and just, again, demonized and used in a way that is drives me crazy.
And used to enact policies like anti-CRT, critical race theory, which has never been in our K-12 schools, but it's been used to attempt to bar not just CRT, but ethnic studies or any consideration of the history, the acknowledged, documented history of blatant racism in this country. And that is all to the detriment. And as you said, it's because the term has been hijacked to be used in that way to create greater ignorance, when the term really is designed to connote greater awareness.
Yeah.
Go ahead. So what do you see as something that is on a positive trajectory for people of color, especially Latinos? I mean, there has to be a huge silver lining that demographically, the Latino population is exploding, and it makes everything more diverse. What are the other sorts of silver linings just from this demographic shift?
Well, certainly, I welcome the census results, regardless of the undercount, because of what they showed in terms of possibility and opportunity through the electoral system to elect candidates supported by the Latino community. And that's going to come to pass when you have the kind of growth the Latino community did this decade. There will be new opportunities, and we will see more and more record-breaking elections of Latino Congress members, record-breaking elections of Latino legislators. It may take a little while in this decade because so many of those in power have done their level best to try to thwart that advancement. But as the decade progresses, we will see more and more of that, more and more Latino representation, or representation of folks with strong Latino support in positions of legislative leadership in particular. We need to work to translate that into broader representation in appointed positions, including judgeships, not just federal, but state as well, in leadership in media, and leadership in corporate America, and leadership in academia. That's the kind of translation of that silver lining that's there and is going to be realized in the electoral arena as a result of the redistricting required every census, with a census that showed such growth for the Latino community. So there's the silver lining to start with. We've got to build off of that, and I believe we will, despite the backlash that we've already talked about.
It's about voting, getting people out to vote as well, to back up that demography that you mentioned.
It is about getting folks out to vote. It is about getting the electorate expanded. I think there's been tremendous work, for example, in felon reenfranchisement in states that denied felons the ability to vote. But the limitation of that campaign has been that it does not treat similarly situated immigrants the same. So you can have two folks both convicted of the same felony. And if there's been a successful felon reenfranchisement movement, the citizen will be able to register and vote again. The immigrant, no matter how long that immigrant has been here, even if he or she came here at the age of 1, if they have not yet naturalized, that felony will prevent them from naturalizing, and by extension then prevent them from voting. So it's just an example of how even in progressive circles, we sometimes take for granted that there can or should be some distinction between native-born citizens and those who have been here nearly as long, but were not born here. And so it's something I think we all need to reflect on, become more woke about, if you will, which is the sort of inherent distinctions that we draw and accept, even in progressive circles, between native-born citizens and those who are not born here.
Yeah. I'm curious, in this job for you, the challenges are huge and a lot of walls to try to break down. How do you keep going against all of that?
Well, I think you have to have in mind the community you're working for. And I certainly know the Latino community and its resilience and its potential, the unrealized potential of kids, so much of which we as a society just give away. We talked about DACA. You want to talk about giving away a tremendous asset to the country. Our refusal to ensure a permanent place for those immigrant youth is to the detriment of the entire country. But having in mind the community that you're fighting for and having in mind the benefit for all of us in the nation, if we are able to take all of that potential and put it to real use, and it keeps you going. It's frustrating sometimes, no question, as you said. Every time I go to a meeting, which this still happens, right? Even today, where I'm the only Latino or one of the only Latinos in the room, it's frustrating. Or where you see another appointment that by all rights should have gone to a Latino, given underrepresentation, go elsewhere, it's frustrating. But you have to keep in mind the community and its tremendous potential to benefit all of us.
Well, Matt and I have been there with you more than a few times, particularly in the business that we work in. So how soon do you think the Seattle office might open?
Well, the pandemic slowed us down and frankly, the press of other work, but I am hopeful that by the end of this calendar year, we will be there with a long-term presence.
All right. Thomas Saenz, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. Look forward to MALDEF making its presence here in Seattle and the Northwest. And good luck and keep fighting the good battle.
Thank you very much. I look forward to being there.
Thank you.